Friday nights at 9 p.m., it's time to sit back, relax, and play Conspiracy Bingo with Echoplex Media. We've curated the best conspiracy theorists the internet has to offer and turned it into a live bingo game you can play for free with absolutely no prizes but bragging rights. You won't find a live stream like this anywhere else, and that's probably better for everyone else's mental health. Tune in every Friday at 9 p.m. Pacific at twitch.tv/EchoplexMedia and find our full schedule at echoplexmedia.com.
I'll get on Twitter, I'll see something outrageous, I'll get triggered by it, but I'll get off 30 seconds later and it's over.
I'm white and I've got everything I need. No one clutches their purses when they're in a room alone with me. And I can drive for any neighborhood I please at any hour, and the police don't do a thing. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got everything I need. I'm a guy getting paid more than a girl with a degree. And I can walk down the streets after dark, no one wants to rape me. And I can get a girl pregnant and just as easily flee. Just like my straight white male dad did to me. So if I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. I've got a pile of broken mirrors and I'm walking under ladders and I'm spilling tons of salt, but to me that doesn't matter, cause my skin and my gender and my orientation are the best things to have if you live in this nation. I recommend it highly. If I see a penny on the ground, I leave it alone and fucking flip it. I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need. Shit's gonna work out for me, cause I'm a straight white male in America. I've got all the luck I need.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Intellectual Dollar Tree. We do the show live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. Right here at twitch.tv/EchoplexMedia. That theme song, by the way, in case people don't read the show notes or don't see the on-screen, is American Tune by Panhandlers Union. They're friends of ours. River is a good friend of ours, has been on our local music show quite a few times and has generally been pretty good. We're going to go ahead and leave the chat up this week for the show. See how that goes. I'm just going to ask everybody in the live chat to try to stay on topic. If you have a whole ass other discussion to have, please do it on Discord. Anyway, you can support this project at patreon.com/Echoplex. You can also go to eplex.store and buy some swag. HK designed a shirt today, and it's a shirt for Dave Rubin. You should go to eplex.store and check it out because it's actually pretty funny. But we're probably going to do some Dave Rubin later during the post game, but during the regular part of the show, you know, a lot of beef from people for making fun of David Fuller because they think he's nice, and so we're going to make fun of David Fuller this week. This is how did the intellectual dark web end?
Massive independent media brand, Rebel Wisdom. I'm sure a lot of people listening or watching already know a thing or two about Rebel Wisdom. And you recently decided, well, it sounds like you went to India. And
Rebel Wisdom didn't end. It's still happening. They're still having weird conversations about demons and shit.
Came back with the decision that Rebel Wisdom is going to come to an end. What happened in India? What did you discover?
I ran out of a bunch of retirees' fucking money.
So this is, yeah.
Oh,
so
shit, he's already doing this one where he's like looking up to be thoughtful.
Some breath work with a amazing breathwork practitioner friend of mine, and it's kind of been my kind of go-to spiritual practice for quite a while, and was kind of intimately connected in a way to the creation of Rebel Wisdom. And as I'm sure people watching will know, Rebel Wisdom's kind of, it interviews a lot of people, public intellectuals, talking about ideas, but very much also based in practice. So relational practices, spiritual practices, meditation practices.
Oh no, I just upped the quality. Am I going to wreck Odyssey's website now? Watch Odyssey's just going to
Different
crash.
embodiment practices.
Look, now it can't. Odyssey can't. The
And it's
website
been
can't
sort of
keep up
tracking
because I
that
asked
whole
for a 720p
ongoing
video,
conversation
please.
about the different intersecting groups that are really interested in these ideas, kind of existential risk, inner and outer transformation, and then the practices as well. And I particularly went to India to
spend a bunch of retirees' money after I sold them a sense-making course for $550 fucking dollars. That's what he went to India to do.
creatively blocked and felt like there was something that was getting in the way. And then while I was doing the breath work, while I was kind of exploring that,
Breath work means like hyperventilating so that you like hallucinate or something. I'm not kidding. He also sold a class on breath work with some other person. Me and HK covered it on like during the post game, and it was like fucking $700 for a class on breath work, which literally means hyperventilate until you hallucinate. I'm not kidding. It's like butthole tanning, but for people who don't want to expose their butthole.
releasing quite a lot of kind of emotion to do with kind of frustration of feeling like I wasn't sure where the project was going. I wasn't sure where the conversation, because we've also been sort of tracking this conversation as well, that's felt like a kind of very live exploration, feeling that I wasn't sure where it was going next. It felt like it was really fragmenting. And while I was doing that, I kind of
translated a lot of the retirees, the pensioners who I had sold my sense making course to, decided not to buy the second sense making course as soon as like the COVID restrictions lifted, because they were allowed to go outside now.
It was like, well, maybe that narrative arc is actually coming to an end. Maybe there is something else, that maybe Rebel Wisdom has served its purpose. And then there was a whole sort of set of conversations as well around, well, maybe that whole heterodox wave that Rebel Wisdom was tracking,
grifting on,
like that whole cultural force, the wave that someone like Jordan,
and not for nothing, like he talks heterodox. Heterodox is legitimately, the way I understand it, is the rejection of empiricism. That's for like some other person who has a different opinion, that is like there's no heterodoxy in plumbing, right? Because if your fucking toilet's overflowing and there's shit all over your floor, you don't need a revolution in plumbing to come in. You need a plumber who with a good reputation. And so there's only heterodoxy in these sort of, I guess, intellectual space, because when the rubber meets the road, there's no heterodoxy. Speaking of the rubber meeting the road, there's no heterodoxy in tires. You buy the right tires for your car.
The wave that created the intellectual dark web feels to me like it peaked, has broken, is now in some ways has done its job. Like I think the kind of the mainstream consensus is kind of lying bleeding on the gutter right now.
But that's, wait, what do you mean? The mainstream consensus on what? Like he says, oh, the mainstream consensus is lying bleeding on the gutter about what? Like, I don't know what he means by that.
We need synthesis, not rebellion. And the question is whether Rebel Wisdom is kind of intimately tied to that kind of rebellion, heterodox wave, and that its time is passing.
Having a bunch of rich white assholes on to sniff their own farts on your show isn't really rebellious, dude.
This heterodox moment, this kind of anti-cancel culture moment. Now that the things have moved on, you feel, then you kind of need a fresh start, it seems.
I feel like the cultural conversation is shifting. I think that, if people like Andrew Sullivan recently said the vibes are shifting. Like I think we hit
Andrew Sullivan, famous for being like a race IQ weirdo,
peak woke, and I think we're now coming back. So I think there's a healthier conversation in the mainstream, and I'm drawn to explore what that might look like. Kind of maybe going a little bit back to my roots as BBC Channel 4 journalist. The Rebel Wisdom story isn't quite complete. There's a whole series of pieces that are going to be coming out between now and the end of November, or
oh, great. Are we going to get more with the fucking demon guy? I hope we get more with the demon guy, because the demon guy was my favorite.
I remember when our last event's going to be. So I feel like very creatively inspired as well. Like that was part of the process.
Yeah, how long can you trick people into paying you for events? Like, that's really when Rebel Wisdom is going to end, right? Is when can this guy stop getting people to pay him to talk about how great it is that they're talking about how great it is that they've had these conversations? Like, how long can he possibly milk that? It's longer than you think, probably, if you're listening to my show and enjoy it.
In India was actually kind of letting go of the emotional attachment to the project as much as I could, and the sort of sense of identity around the thing that I think has really been my identity for the last 4 or 5 years. Actually, I felt a huge creative liberation, and so many of the things that I was kind of wrestling with now I feel much more creatively inspired, and I hope there's going to be a lot of really good content. Well, there's going to be a lot of content. I hope it's really good. Documentaries, written pieces coming out between now and October and November, and then I don't quite know what my next thing is, but I feel like it's
going to involve old people's pensions.
Yeah, there's this sort of, I don't know how comfortable you are with the kind of spiritual practice, slightly more woo talk, but there's something that I think is emerging.
Oh no, he's going to go like full on spiritual guru. This is going to be great. He's going to be like, PayPal, Venmo.
That is going to be a new thing. Rebel Wisdom was the right form for its time, and I think that something else, I don't know what that something else is. I've got a few sort of broad outlines, but I also don't want to jump to something before the time is ready for it to have fully kind of constellated yet.
Totally makes sense. Well, maybe we can exploratively feel through what that thing might be by talking a little bit about.
We should talk a little bit about how great it is that we're going to talking about how the next thing is going to happen, actually. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about how wonderful it is that we're sitting on this couch and talking about the fact that we might have a conversation about spirituality, and that might have something to do with the next thing you're going to do, which will be conversations about the last thing you were doing and how great that was.
That heterodox moment was this moment that you think is passing, because it seems that you have a good sense for these kinds of cultural trends. I think you kind of pride yourself on that to some degree, being able to sense when a cultural tidal wave is brewing, and in a large part you built Rebel Wisdom on a certain wager of that particular tidal wave that was what we're calling the heterodox moment. So you are probably prescient in sensing that something is changing, and you probably have the correct sense that something new is coming, and you might not know immediately what it is, but why don't we start with what was, looking back on the heterodox moment, maybe with the clarity and detachment, a little bit of hindsight. What was it really? Have your views on it changed, or have you learned anything in retrospect that surprises you?
I feel like, so you mentioned kind of you used a gambling metaphor. Was that
a wager? Did I say?
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think my kind of skill is, because I've been in the media and in the cultural conversation for a very long time, inside newsrooms.
Your skill is getting pensioners to give you money for things like a breathwork course. That's your core competency. Because
I think there's a lot of people who are in the media, but they're maybe kind of like, if they're an opinion columnist or they're sort of just sending in, they're a kind of jobbing journalist, they probably will send in articles. They may not have been part of a newsroom, but actually having been part of a newsroom at BBC and Channel 4 and just seen been part of those conversations for like 15 years or so, you get a real sense of where the cultural conversation is. In a quite a visceral way. And then when I saw Jordan Peterson in 2017, I was like, oh my God, this guy's going to go viral for so many different reasons. One, because I think because he was very transphobic, and people are very transphobic. From the broader cultural perspective, like the new atheist worldview, I think is full of holes, and Peterson was challenging that. And I think that was overdue. He was bringing back all the new atheists ended up fucking. They either went woke or whatever that means, or they ended up liking Jordan Peterson. Religion to a place that was kind of desperate for a deeper sense of meaning, a deeper sense of purpose.
Right.
So there's that kind of the meaning crisis that John Vervaeke talks about. There was that angle that Peterson was directly talking to. Then there was the cultural piece of we're in a culture that's lost touch with so many traditional values and has overshot in terms of blank slateism and postmodernism and deconstruction to the point where so many people don't know what the fuck to do because we've kind of undermined all of these kind of traditional ways of knowing so Peterson,
we've undermined all these traditional ways of knowing. When he says traditional ways of knowing, he just means religious fundamentalism, essentially, or like some kind of spiritualism, some kind of like, dare I say, supernatural orthodoxy from on high.
was definitely bringing that sort of lost traditionalism and the kind of father archetype for a generation of particularly young men, but I think of many people who were craving that kind of father archetype, like the world which says you can be anything that you want to be and just make it up for yourselves.
Right.
Doesn't give any purpose or direction. So Peterson was coming in with that sense of like,
Right, but the internet dad phenomena was bad. Were any of them good? Who was the good internet dad? Wasn't Stefan Molyneux. Wasn't no fucking Jordan Peterson. Who else? A Sargon of Akkad was like an internet dad, kind of. Like all them internet dads were fucking bad people, or to the extent that they're still part of the conversation or whatever, they're bad people. Because they weren't like telling young men, oh, you know, not everything that's going on here is necessarily your fault. And, you know, some of it is society, but also you can make your life better in the following ways or whatever. They weren't doing that. They're like, it's all the women. The women are fucking you over. And it's like, well, that doesn't really help anyone. And it just turns these young men who might not have turned into monsters. Well, now you've turned them into monsters.
no, there are certain evolved characteristics, there are certain evolved ways of being that you discount at your peril, while hopefully, I mean, the ideal is not being constrained by those. So you're not just purely arguing conservatism, but you are arguing that you need to take account of these things before.
You're purely arguing conservatism.
And it was all very anti, wasn't it? It was very anti-cancel culture,
Yeah.
anti-woke.
Yes.
You know,
Listen to this interview. This interviewer is just saying the same thing over and over and over again.
big sense of indignation,
Yeah.
kind of a sense of marginalization. And I feel like all cultural trends that, I mean, the feeling of indignation, especially when it's righteous, especially when it's validly righteous, you know, when there's like something really genuinely to be opposed to that's dominant and wrong and stupid, that can be really galvanizing and energizing, but it also kind of runs out of steam at a certain point, right? And
Or you become captured by it yourself.
Right.
Which I think is what happened with Peterson.
That's fascinating. So there's kind of two things there. There's it naturally runs out of steam once you're anti something. If you win, then it's no longer really interesting to be anti something. And it does kind of seem like now the people who went full, who just forgot about cancel culture, or people who like got canceled but kept going, it seems like those people are winning. I think, and I think I've kind of been saying this for a while now.
Who got
but I think
canceled?
now it's increasingly clear that we're so past cancel culture that in fact all the rising stars who I would bet the most on are people who have been fully canceled completely.
But if they're rising stars, how are they fully canceled? I don't understand this guy.
The cancellation problem has already been defeated. Like all you really need is courage and determination, and you got to keep going. But if you do, it's like you come out the other side bigger. So I think that's part of it, in my opinion, is that the value of being opposed and indignant to this stuff is over, because you can just ignore it and do great things, and it's even more interesting if you just skip right over it. I think that's part of it. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I
don't usually smoke weed during the podcast recording part of this show, but I mean, come on.
There is this
look at this
problem,
drivel we're
where
taking.
if you
We're
rise too
consuming
big
here.
on this kind of indignation and this kind of righteous opposition, you can kind of get stuck there, can't you?
Yeah.
What have you seen with that regard? What is your diagnosis of Peterson?
So Peterson is one example, but I would say what's been fascinating to watch is that over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, like the morality tale for me of the whole IDW, intellectual dark web, which was, I'm assuming most of your viewers will know what it is, but kind of like some podcasters, public intellectuals who were identified in 2018.
Okay, so I want to just stop right here. One of the main talking points of this show is that we reject the notion that a public intellectual is a good thing to be. There are people who are public who are smart and like can figure things out and have insights and stuff, but as soon as somebody gets into that into that space where everybody's referring to them as a public intellectual, that person usually either is already or will become soon just a giant piece of shit who is like so full of themselves. And then their fucking fans end up being like the worst people in the world. Their fans end up like just fucking believing everything that person says and like defending them like they're a Scientologist defending L. Ron Hubbard. And so like one of the big things about this show, and one of the big things that I think people like about the Intellectual Dollar Tree, is that we don't care if someone's a public intellectual, because they're just as dumb as the fucking rest of us. Everybody's dumb and stupid all at the same time, you know?
As this is the solution for the sense-making crisis. The mainstream media, the legacy media, is so kind of like ideologically captured. There are so many kind of incentive structures that mean that it's no longer fit for purpose as a truth-seeking enterprise, which I have a lot of empathy for, sympathy for as an argument. The argument was these people are independent, they have independent means, they are able to follow truth fearlessly. But
when he says independent means he says these people are rich. These people are rich and we should listen to them. That's all he's saying here.
Realize was that no, if you're outside the institutions, by definition, you're dependent on your audience. And that audience kind of feedback becomes a warping factor in what you're able to say, what you're able to do. And I think for a lot of people, in a way that is completely imperceptible. Like Peterson is a perfect example of someone who, he had that kind of reactive side to him, but when he did that incredible interview with Kathy Newman, why it was so amazing was that he kept his cool. He was calm. He was kind of laughing. He was
God. They're like,
kind of, I think it's
they're
fine.
like hearkening back to like 2017.
Maybe his single best piece ever. Yeah.
Yeah, it was his manner as much as anything that won that argument. And then the more he's become the caricature of himself that the kind of far left always said that he was, the less.
No. He didn't become what the far left said he was. To the extent that I am the far left, he was always what the far left said he was. He was always the things that I said he was. The whole time.
I think he's going to have the more he's become a kind of, I think the characterization, it's fascinating to me to see that so many people have actually gone backwards in their ability to kind of make sense of the world, in their the kind of rabbit holes that they've gone down, or the kind of reactivity or conspiratorial ideation.
But they were doing this the whole time. Like, we were talking about this from the jump on this show, that these people were conspiracy theorists and that it was conspiratorial ideation. It's just that it had to get so blatant and in everyone's face for hangers on like David Fuller to notice it. Like for him, it's like, I'd be like, I feel like somebody's painting on my face. And he'd be like, oh, nobody's painting on my face, until they paint like right over his eyes. And he's like, oh, I guess they're painting on my face. Well, some of us just noticed it when it was like down over here somewhere, like on our neck or whatever. We're like, I think somebody's painting on me.
Ideation or whatever. Like, there's no curiosity, there's no openness, there's no kind of, people have become more and more extreme versions of whatever their views were maybe back in 2018. And that's a really fascinating, and there's so many reasons for that. I think relative fame in later life, after you've kind of felt that you've got something special to share for most of your life, is a really warping factor. Especially if you're not used to that kind of popularity. That's a big issue that has really kicked in for a lot of these people.
Well, it's hard enough to change your mind when you're older, but to do it with the baggage of millions of people who love you for one specific thing that you represent.
Yeah.
You know, I have a lot of sympathy for that.
Why do you have sympathy for that? That's poor. That's called poor character. If you're famous for believing such, and let's say in Jordan Peterson's case, he became famous for a belief that he had about Canadian Bill C-16. That belief was false. When he was presented with the text of Canadian Bill C-16 and people telling him, no, that's not really what's going on here, he displayed poor character by saying to himself, or I don't know if he said it to himself, finding ways to like justify or rationalize that he's like, you know what, I'm going to go with the crowd that's making me feel famous, instead of just being like, oh, I guess I got it wrong.
it's got to be almost impossible to significantly update.
Yeah, and I felt that kind of viscerally from the inside, like the YouTube comments thread and the kind of the audience that you've attracted and where you're algorithmically placed. Like I know where Rebel Wisdom's algorithmically placed and who the kind of where people are coming from, and it's people that most of our viewers are coming from, like Jordan Peterson or Russell Brand or the Dark Horse, and all of them to one degree or another. Like Russell Brand is now like full on clickbait, conspiratorial.
Is he? I didn't notice.
Yeah,
I didn't see
like,
that.
But he wasn't that when I first encountered him, but he's been that for a while now. Like a lot of people just got COVID brain. They didn't even necessarily have to get COVID to get COVID brain.
Go to his channel and look at the kind of look at the titles of the videos. Like he's completely changed.
Wow.
And so many of these people have really.
He saw which way the money tree was blowing, Dave, just like you did.
And in a way, like Rebel Wisdom was part of that. We definitely were sort of part of that kind of heterodox wave of 2018 onwards.
Yeah, you were. At first we were like, this show is about the intellectual dark web and their adjacent assholes, and this guy was just one of the adjacent assholes.
Try to have a deeper sense of practice, self-reflection, mindfulness. Our sense-making course, for example, is not just
just $550 and mostly sold to pensioners.
Make sense of the world, but how do you make sense of ourselves? How do we make sense of our kind of motivations? How do we look at our shadow motivations? How do we look at kind of how we're being manipulated by the tools that we're using? All of these sort of things, and try to bring in a bit more of a kind of holistic perspective than just being about the ideas or just being about kind of.
So like a cult, like a religious cult.
I wanted to build Rebel Wisdom much bigger. I would have just carried on kind of following the anti-woke playbook, because there's a huge audience for that content on YouTube. Like people just want to keep hearing.
You know what's funny is like there might be some people in my audience who find some of Rebel Wisdom's angles a little woo, as you self-deprecatingly alluded to, modestly alluded to.
As you self-deprecatingly and modestly alluded to, just give him a handy, my friend. Just give David Fuller a handy. Come on. This is a date.
But interestingly, the benefit and the value of that is showing itself in this case, where you have this detachment and this humility and this ability to step back and say, you know what? This was temporary. This was for a particular moment. I see where I think other people are going off the deep end, and we're going to make the decision to just wrap this up and pivot onto something else. And, in a way, if people are skeptical of what might sound a little woo, it actually is really showing off its strength. And
no, you don't need to believe in some kind of supernatural thing to be like, you know what I'm doing actually seems to be coming to an end here. And to the extent that it isn't coming to an end, I don't want to be a part of what it's becoming anymore, because whatever reason, I find it distasteful. I find it dishonest. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. You could do that without like believing in the supernatural or having any kind of spiritual awareness or awakening. People jump shit on things all the time, or jump ship on things all the time without having to like even do a whole lot of introspection, much less have any kind of spiritual awakening. People just realize, oh, the party's over. Sometimes they just realize that at a party and go home.
And its advantage in a moment like this, because it's really hard to wrap.
If I showed up at this party, the party would be over and I'd be going home.
Thing that is financially successful, that you can keep growing if you want to. It takes a lot of mindfulness and a lot of awareness and genuine kind of commitment to real values to be able to say, oh, okay, this is succeeding and keeps growing, but it's not what needs to happen now. I want to do something different. And to have the mindfulness for that, that probably you can only get that with the kind of mindfulness that you're so interested in. So I think that's actually
but to have the mind, first of all, this guy's talking in circles. He's like, well, to have that kind of mindfulness, you need the mindfulness that you used. Come on. This is like possibly the worst interview we've watched on Intellectual Dollar Tree. I'm here for it. Don't get me wrong, but this might be one of the worst interviews we've ever watched on this show.
A pretty powerful lesson to the people who maybe are skeptical of all the mindfulness.
Yeah, and I'd say that of the
mindfulness gets kind of a bad rap, but it's because it's been like sort of hijacked by a bunch of woo people. Being mindful just means like thinking about what you're doing. Like, why would that be bad? Like, why would it get a bad rap to just be like, oh, well, what am I actually doing right now? Like, how am I behaving? How's that going to impact others? Is that good or bad? Like, that's all great stuff, actually. And people need to do a little bit more of it when they start. But excuse me, a lot of these people think you can only like have mindfulness through some sort of ritual. And that's not true.
The people in that original constellation, I think, have gone least off the rails. I'd say Sam Harris and Joe Rogan, both of whom are kind of have got
Joe Rogan's gone all the way off the rails
that they're doing. Sam, obviously, with his meditation background. Joe, I think, is much more of an embodied person. Like he's got the MMA. Like he's used to being. He's got resilience. He's got kind of embodied resilience.
Right.
And I have to say, like, I it's not that I have no doubts about the wrap up of Rebel Wisdom. I still kind of, I'm like, am I really?
We did a video before I moved about how he was doing his last Rebel Wisdom video, and he's done enough of them that we've done, I don't know, a half of our episodes maybe, either during the actual like podcast recording or during the post game. They've been Rebel Wisdom videos. This guy didn't wrap up with Rebel Wisdom, and he's never going to. He's just going around acting holier than thou right now. It's amazing.
Is this the right decision? And I've got plenty of people telling me that it's not the right decision. It still feels right that something else, it's not the right vehicle for whatever I feel needs to come next.
Right.
But,
sure.
But there's also a sense of like, there's a real sense of kind of almost a grieving process that I feel to go through first before deciding what it is that comes next.
Sure, fair enough. So you have this theory that COVID was an inflection point for sending some people off the rails.
Come on, he has this theory. It was clearly an inflection point. Like, what do you mean David Fuller has this theory? Get the fuck out of here. David Fuller didn't. Everybody figured that out. Everybody paying attention. Everybody who was doing like social commentary in any sort of way had to figure out that no matter where you land on either somebody who doesn't even believe the things that I believe, or somebody who's like on the opposite end of the spectrum as far as like COVID, masks, vaccines, the request to stay at home, they know that this was an inflection point too, where people got into a couple different camps and dug in. Yeah, like this is not even. I'm not even sure this is like a theory. This is like it's like history. It's like what happened. It's like we all watched it and we all participated in it too, to some extent.
And this kind of dynamic you're describing, where people over time at a certain level of fame kind of tend to get captured by their audience and become a caricature of themselves. What did COVID change? What exactly did COVID accelerate? And what was it about COVID that seemed to push people off the deep end more rapidly?
So I think COVID was like a catalyst.
You know what he's not going to say, and that we knew immediately, is that everybody's stuck at home. And so no matter who you are or what content you're creating, COVID was the time to try to grab your audience. We did a bad job of it. We should have, there should be a lot more people like watching and consuming our content, considering all things considered. And, like that's just how it is. But he's not going to bring this up, is that there were a lot of people sitting around at home who were unhappy about what's going on. And if you were able to capture that audience, you could have gone from zero to one of the most, not maybe one of the most popular people, but to a very popular person very quickly. We didn't. We thought maybe we could, and we did everything, we gave it a try, but we didn't. And David Fuller's not going to bring that up.
It was an accelerator of a lot of stuff that was already there. And from a sense-making perspective, truth-seeking perspective, I feel like there are a lot of people who are pushed into, what do you call, not quite trauma, but this is something John Bevacki said. He predicted right at the beginning of the pandemic that there was going to be a huge rise in conspiratorial thinking because the nature...
But you platformed all of it until you decided it was distasteful to keep doing it, David.
of the threat is kind of ever present, but it's invisible. There's these purity codes about kind of washing your hands, and like he's like, this puts us into a very kind of Old Testament way of thinking.
Yeah,
he's like, this is triggering so many. So you get kind of apophenia, overactive like pattern recognition. We're much more open to kind of conspiratorial thinking, but also on the other side, flipping into just completely kind of what Peter Lindbergh would call COVID thesis, just do what you're told, don't question. And I think on both sides, like that's
a dichotomy that I don't think really existed. This is just a false choice. He's like, you're either a conspiracy theorist or you just do what you're told because you're a sheep. That's one of the main things you have to think to be a conspiracy theorist. Now, don't get me wrong. He's going to tell you, if he gets around to it, he's going to tell you that him and his audience didn't do that. They're going to be the only ones. They were doing the sense making. But he just posited the core tenet of conspiratorial thinking is this black and white, with us or against us. And he just said either you became a conspiracy theorist, like full on conspiracy theorist, or you just did what you were told and are a sheep. And it's like, that's conspiracism. Like one of the 5 things.
The conversation fragmented and really fragmented around the COVID kind of thesis and antithesis, where they weren't talking to each other. And this was a fundamental rift, particularly in America, I think. We kind of kept it together a little bit more in the UK for various reasons. Like it never felt like it completely fractionated society in the same way.
Wait, what word did he use?
It never felt like it completely fractionated society.
Fractionate. I'm sure that's a word, but why use it?
It'd be interesting to go through them a little bit because you pay close attention to this space. So I don't always necessarily. So
I pay closer attention to the space than Fuller did, because if he had been paying close attention to the space, he wouldn't have gotten himself like in with all these wackadoodles that he's like bemoaning that he got himself in with. What a poor judge of character this guy is.
He went wrong. What was his big recent inflection point in your diagnosis?
I mean, now if you follow him on Twitter, you're basically seeing him insulting plus size black swimwear models.
Oh, I recall that tweet.
It's just like, what?
So none of the other warning signs for Jordy Pete from his behavior at all were like, he's like, well, this guy seems like maybe he's not behaving very well. The whole weird shit about going to Russia and the benzos, nope, all that was fine. He's like, I thought that lady was hot. And so that was it for me. That was it for me and old Jordy Pete. I thought that lady was hot and he didn't. So we can't be friends anymore, Jordy Pete.
And coming back and saying, oh, Twitter just with no kind of like, oh, no admittance of like, actually, you know what? It was a silly thing to have tried to have done this on Twitter. I'll do it as a podcast. But no, coming back with just full, everyone's being beastly to me. I'm going to give up Twitter and it's everyone else's fault. It's like,
right.
Really? Like, that's the personal responsibility guy.
That's how he was. That's how he behaved the entire time, Fuller. You just noticed it because for whatever reason, like, I'm not even kidding. He probably thought that lady was hot, right? And so, like, because it's the only way he would end up in this place. Otherwise, he'd be like, oh, it was just expressing his opinion.
Already understand enough how these platforms work, right? It's like, we can't really feign surprise anymore, right? When it's like, when you say something that's, provocative, we know how these platforms work. We know what happens, right? It's like, there's a lot of that, isn't there? There's a lot of this kind of like feigned surprise or feigned shock. Like, this stuff plays out over and over again every day on Twitter. And it's like, everyone insists on, being shocked and awed when they say something provocative and their mentions are filled with insane amounts of hatred and antagonism.
You tell me if you've heard this. You're obviously sort of deep in different kind of intellectual traditions, and there's something about the feedback loop of social media that I think is having an unexpected consequence of forcing people to constellate and kind of crystallize around their ideas and their ideology, and often like some of their worst ideas, because you put it out there on social media, people criticize it, you end up defending it, so you build up your...
No, what this is called, David, is this is called poor character. He keeps like, acting like people who have poor character. It's new, actually, that some famous people are shit, is what he's saying, right? He's like, oh, this person can't handle criticism. This must be new from social media. No, dude. There've always been people who can't handle criticism. Like, what is this? This is like the most naive shit I've ever heard this guy say, I think. Like, what are you talking about?
Or psychological attachment to something that maybe
some old bigoted professor can't take criticism? You don't say.
You should only have
maybe not old,
70%
middle-aged bigoted professor, right?
80% confidence in. So it seems that people crystallize their personality and their worldviews because they're forced to defend it, because this sort of tribalizing aspect comes in on Twitter as well.
Right.
And it's like they kind of
what he's doing here is weird, and I'm gonna have a hard time explaining it, but I see people do this a lot. He's like almost taking away the agency of the person who is in the center of what he would describe as like a cancel culture firestorm or whatever. And that once they do something stupid, that they have no control over how anything plays out after, right? He's like, oh, well, you did a thing and now everybody's complaining at you for it. Well, you could apologize. You could go oops and move on. Because people fuck up all the time and just go oops and then they move on. And most of the time, unless what they did was just incredibly really bad, people generally forgive them because they're just a person. And so everybody he's talking, Jordan Peterson specifically, had every opportunity to just do this and just never did it. And so now he's like living with the consequences of that behavior. But David Fuller is almost he's almost taking Jordan Peterson's ability to act and change what happens out of it as soon as like the thing initiates. I don't know. I hope I'm not doing my own sense making or my own fucking word salad here.
Social media works at the moment. It kills curiosity. It seems to kill growth. It seems to kill any opportunity for dialogue across the divides because it's quite effectively tribalized, and those divisions between the tribes are viciously policed as well. If you see if you start to learn the landscape, you realize like how well established, and there's sort of different roles of people like policing the boundaries of various tribes, and all of that starts to come in. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. There is something about that feedback loop with social media that seems to just crystallize people into a kind of like they've assumed their final form in a way, and their final form gets more and more kind of reactive.
But those people have bad character. I can't stress this enough. That David Fuller just has such a hard time recognizing when people's character is just bad, right? I think Jordan Peterson's fucking problems generally come from the fact that he has bad character. And, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's ad hominem or whatever, but it seems to never occur to David Fuller that some of the people he was like palling around with just had bad character the whole fucking time and he couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, definitely. I think the mechanism that you're describing is something along the lines of this. It's like,
and I don't know how I'd do with millions of fans. Maybe I'd fuck up and double down. Well, and I guess my character ain't that great either, is it?
Provocative ideas that draw a lot of polarization, draws haters, but also draws lovers. Those ideas are the ones that you get the most social media growth around, basically. And so in a way, if you say something on the internet that gets you a big burst of new followers, to keep growing, you have to respect that burst of new followers, or you won't keep growing. And so any social media platform is intrinsically gained.
Oh no, yeah, it's like what this guy's saying. He's like, it's like the Nazi bar argument, right? So if anybody's never heard the Nazi bar, it's like the idea that if you let a couple Nazis hang out a table in your bar, that maybe a couple weeks later the other patrons might notice that they're Nazis and be like, oh, I'm not going to really hang out here as much. And so then like a few of your regular patrons leave and the Nazis go, hey, you know what? Some of the regular patrons left and we're still here. Let's tell our friends to come hang out at this bar. And so then now there's Nazis at your bar, and then all the rest of your patrons leave because there's just like 20 Nazis there. And now you have a Nazi bar. And that's what he's like, if you do something controversial and a bunch of fucking shitty people show up, well, I guess you need to respect those people that are shitty that show up, or you're not going to keep growing. And I just come back to, well, if that's what you decide to do, then you have bad character. And every bit of like, short of like real abuse and doxing and stuff, every bit of vitriol and criticism, even the harshest criticism that comes your way, is now deserved because of the decisions you've made about what kind of audience you're willing to cultivate in order to make money. And so it's not like, again, it just takes the agency of oh, I guess this fucking thing happened to them. Now they have all these followers and some of them are dirtbags. And so I guess they just got to be nice to the dirtbags. Well, no, they don't. They just do it because fucking money, 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 money.
Number go up, right? That's what most social media are. They're like a video games for adults, where like the medium of the game is words. You type words in, or pictures or whatever. It's like an adult video game. But ultimately, at the end of the day,
Should I see if this other guy will have me on his show to talk about sense making? I feel like I could get on this guy's show. I don't want to go to his weird room though.
Just want to make their follower count go up. That's
room probably smell weird.
So I think that's essentially what's happening in what you describe. It's that. Because I've noticed this that like I've had a few, kind of nuclear tweets over the years. And in those nuclear tweets, you get a ton of haters, but you also get a ton of new followers. And it was very clear to me. It was always very clear to me. I could just choose for the next 6 months after one of those nuclear tweets to just keep saying stuff like that, throw as much red meat as possible to all those new people, right? And also piss off all the same people who are getting pissed off, who inadvertently share it even more, right? And it was always clear that was a very available growth path. And if most people are just playing these things like video games.
I don't know who this guy is. I'm not sure that I don't know if that growth path was available to him. I mean, it's as available to him as it is to me, right? But like until you reach a certain level on there, like you have to have like 50 or 100,000 followers on Twitter before you even have to consider any of this stuff, I think.
Basically trained by the platforms to do, then it makes sense from like an evolutionary game theory perspective that at the end, in the final equilibrium, the platform is only going to surface people who basically double down on those growth opportunities. Because if you don't, and like I haven't, every time I've gone super nuclear on some provocative tweet, I set that aside for a little bit. I like stepped away from it. I talked about other things, right? Because I don't want to be like known for 1 or 2 provocative tweets or whatever. It's not like what I'm upset.
I'll be the fucking hot take guy if it pays all my bills and I live comfortably. Fuck it.
With. So I don't want to be that.
As long as it's like 1 or 2 hot takes that are actually pretty decent takes and people are just fucking mad about it or whatever, I'll be like, stay mad.
So I'd go on to other things. And people could say this is just cope or whatever, but I'm not as big as I could be because I write about all kinds of things and I try my honest best to not really have a tribe. And
that's its own tribe. Oh, God, David Fuller will never talk to me. He has complained behind my back about me to people. I'm mutuals with him on Twitter, which is strange because we're so much smaller than him, and especially at the time. But this other guy, I would love to talk to this other guy, the guy interviewing him, because I would just have this guy for lunch. I would be so polite, and I would just have this guy for lunch. He's so like just very surface level, just like there's nothing there.
I don't think it's cope. I think it's actually just honest and objective to say that like my audience could be much bigger if I just leaned harder into. I was like if I decided to be like a Jordan Peterson fan and a Brett Weinstein fan and ally and cozied up to all those guys early days, got them on my podcast early, and ingratiated myself in those communities and all. Like you can do that, and you can grow faster that way. And I do pride myself a little bit on being a lone wolf, and I've never done that. But my point is not to.
I mean, this is like me saying this stuff. I don't know how popular is this guy.
And I do believe this is empirically.
I mean, I don't have any followers on Odyssey. He's got 1,600 followers on Odyssey. That's actually good because nobody's on Odyssey.
Valid that there are just strong selection pressures in favor of doing more of that thing that is provocative, but the perversity of that is that often the thing that gets you growth is like a dumb idea or a bad idea or the most extreme idea or ridiculous ideas, and you end up.
But there's a way in which like a bad, like what if I all of a sudden like somebody hella famous just shared out that fucking clip of me from this channel where I was saying like that Ben Shapiro is a problematic wood, right? Like if that went fucking viral, it's funny. I would be fine with like getting a bunch of followers off that, even though it was ridiculous. It's like harmless. It's not hurting anybody. except maybe the soul of a few people who read it or see
down
it.
the hardest on some of your weakest ideas. So that's how I think that is true. I think that is how it works. And so in the case of, so you talked a little bit about Peterson. What about Brett Weinstein? What was his trajectory, and where did he go wrong?
It's a difficult one to talk about because Brett, I felt more of a kind of personal friendship with Brett. And
Well, that's the problem with all of this, actually, is if you're supposed to be like a dispassionate observer of the body politic and the conversations going on, you can't really be buddies with the people you're supposed to be doing analysis about, can you?
we'd done quite a lot of events together.
And I respect him a lot. Yeah.
I always did, and he's kind of part of the broader networks of a lot of the other people that we featured, and there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes at the time when we had what amounted to a kind of falling out. And my main point was always trying to keep the dialogue open. And Brett, even to this day, has not hosted a single medical figure who contradicts the narrative that he's been putting forward about ivermectin and vaccines.
But they never had anybody on who was capable of talking about subject matters that they were talking about who might disagree with them before, even before the pandemic. Like none of them did. It was the joke about the IDWs that all of them were terrified of Sam Cedar, right? So this isn't like why is this guy so bad at judging character that a fucking global pandemic has to happen and people need to act in ways that are just unbelievably stupid for this guy to be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have been associating with that person. Like what? Like how naive do you have to be?
And my feeling was that particular topic, the vaccines, the ivermectin, all of that stuff, that was one of the most heated areas of the culture, never really. It then blew up. I mean, ironically, it blew up with Joe Rogan only about 6 months afterwards, when he hosted some of the same people Brett had been hosting back in, I think, summer 21. And yeah, I don't really. It was difficult, and it's the difficult dynamics as well that no one really knows how to deal with. And you heard Sam Harris kind of addressing it a little bit as well. We don't really know what to do when our personal brand gets tied up with our. Like we knew when we were in the media and
wait, how do you not know how? Okay, he's just saying, and he's not going to say it because it sounds stupid and like almost like schoolyard. When my friend does a stupid thing, I don't know how to handle it because that's my friend, but they also did a stupid thing. I just don't know what to do. I'm a full-grown adult, supposedly even to some extent a public intellectual, but I just don't know what to do when someone who is very popular, I think they're causing harm. If they're my friend, like what do I do? Again, these people all have just really very poor character and are so very concerned with their interpersonal relationships with these other famous people that even like just the simplest shit in the world where you go, okay, I either stick with my friend even though they're wrong, or I speak out against my friend because they're wrong enough that I need to speak out against them. Just that decision now just is like the most difficult fucking thing in the world.
Institutions, we had some game rules. We understood some game rules. Now that we're all our own platforms and you've got personal relationships tied up with truth seeking, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do.
But wait, like he's telling on himself, right? Like he's like, I have no integrity. I have like no like ethical or moral foundation for how I'm conducting myself in this space. And so like when a thing comes up where my friend is doing a bad, I'm just not equipped for it. He's trying to say the world isn't equipped for it, I think. But it's just him who's not equipped for it. Because all the people he's been around have like really shitty character. And so by the transitive property of shitty character, I think David Fuller has shitty character. And none of these people like believe in anything or care about anything enough for it to trigger something in their brain when somebody else is doing something stupid. It's all just like, isn't it nice that we're having this conversation? Well, all of a sudden it isn't nice that you're having this conversation, is it? You can't handle it, which is a mind-blowing thing to hear an adult say.
And I wasn't necessarily, I looked into some of the claims that particularly some of Brett's guests and Brett were making on ivermectin and vaccines, and they didn't seem to add up. But at the same time, that's not really the priority. The priority for me was, how do you create opportunity? Because if Brett was right about some of these are really important topics. If Brett's wrong, they're really important topics as well, like lives are at stake.
Right, but that's why we're just ask Brett these questions, you idiot. Brett isn't even the right person to answer most of the questions you're talking about. So you got that.
You do when one of your friends is putting out stuff that looks to me like he's putting lives at risk. We don't really know, like, what it's a real moral dilemma.
No, it's not. It's a fucking black and white question. You have very few of them. You either stick by your friend or you don't.
To put out
it might be a hard decision, but it's not. There's not a lot to it.
The way that he was going about things.
I'll be right back. I need more caffeine.
Increasingly, he's now gone down a particular rabbit hole. He was just recently at a conference in Bath, which was hosted by Del Bigtree, old school anti-vaccine activist. Okay. Like the narrative of, oh, we're not criticizing vaccines, we're just criticizing these vaccines. Now, like, it's not true. Like, the interesting narrative dynamic now is that the people who now COVID is kind of going away as a live issue.
And he couldn't figure out at the beginning when Brett and Heather were using these very common, very well-known anti-vaccine talking points around the COVID vaccine. He couldn't even be fussed to be like, let me check their Twitters for the word vaccine. Because they had anti-vaccine stuff on their Twitter before. It just wasn't a big part of what they were doing. So again, this guy just, whatever he's supposed to be doing with journalism, I guess, this guy, like, not cut out for it. Not skeptical enough, not cynical enough, wants to be friends with everybody.
We're sort of following that conspiratorial path going to go. Great Reset, WEF, Klaus Schwab, like, there's kind of conspiracy inflation that people like Majid Nawaz have already kind of gone further down, and it's like people and
Brett and Heather were conspiracy theorists before.
I don't think that path's particularly helpful. I don't think it's
before the pandemic. Brett Weinstein called QAnon an argument. We literally named the podcast that. QAnon is an argument or something. He wouldn't even call it a conspiracy theory. I think he called it an argument.
My friend Jamie Wheel called it malevolent design. It's kind of this sort of sense of like them. It's a psychological attractor, and it's a psychological attractor that I think stops people thinking. People should have equal skepticism of the narratives on both sides, and I think the problem with a lot of the
no, you shouldn't
contrarian space is that they were
you shouldn't. Both sides of what? Again, plumber or not a plumber? They both claim they have a great way to fix your fucking plumbing. Should you just have equal skepticism of both people, like both sides? Like, what are these people talking about?
Rightfully skeptical of the mainstream narratives and completely oblivious to the audience capture, to the commercial incentives. Commercial incentives on the conspiratorial side are huge. Like, huge amounts of people who are donating to people who are following that. The whole conspirituality tendency during the pandemic was a load of wellness influencers who realized that when they started sharing QAnon stuff, they got a lot more traction.
Right. No, that was happening before the Oh my God. I feel like I feel like it's the worst thing in the web, but I feel like they should have just listened to me. Like, I don't know. You could go back, in our podcast. We were talking about all this stuff before the pandemic hit. Like, and we were dumb. We're dumb. We're drunks. We smoke weed. We aren't public intellectuals, and we figured out what was going, what the fuck, man, why are these very smart people so bad at figuring out when someone else is full of shit?
And so there's a huge attraction.
I think
that people don't seem to. The frustration I have, at least from the comments thread that I see, is just the naivety, just the lack of kind of willingness to challenge the narratives on both sides with equal skepticism.
The other thing is there's just not. And why do there have to be two different? I mean, on some of them, the issues of the day, there are probably 10 competing narratives at any given time, not 2. I just made up 10, but it ain't 2.
frame is massively selected for. It's a growth hack. I mean, it's like, if you can just say
a little man willing to speak the truth against the kind of the big
people are
man
just so much more likely to share and to love it and to get enthusiastic if you can frame anything you're saying, if you can frame it as righteously opposed to some other entity or them, it will always get more traction. People will love it more. People will identify with it more. They'll get more excited. They'll be more likely to share. And I've seen that a lot for sure. So, it's interesting to think, from your perspective, what do you think is the key to building viable media in this context, right? Because obviously you're taking a step back to think about
take pensioners' money. It's been working for David Fuller,
and you're very sensitive to these things. But it sounds like you're still invested in media. You still you're thinking about building a production company. What do you think might be some leads? I know you don't have this all figured out yet, but what are some touchstones or some key ideas or bullet points for the future of independent media that somehow dodges all of these kind of biases and selection effects?
It's a really good question, because you can also look at something like Substack as a similar problem, because people on Substack, there's the same dynamic. They attract a certain audience. It's very sort of narrow casting. They then have to look for more and more content that feeds that particular audience, that particular narrative. And I think that's been problematic as well. I think there are some people who do push back against their audience. I want to give a shout out to someone like Daniel Pinchbeck, who, despite being in a very kind of conspiratorial ecosystem, has taken stances that are unpopular with his audience. He's called out Russell Brand, for example, and I found him to have a lot of moral clarity over Ukraine and Russia when a lot of the conspiratorial ecosystem was falling prey.
So you're friends in a conspiratorial ecosystem, and you have a lot of respect for him for occasionally saying something that they don't agree with.
Creators can still push back against the tide, but the tide's pretty intense in one direction.
Right.
The other thing, this is one of the questions that I have for whatever comes next after Rebel Wisdom, is that I was feeling a sort of sense of discomfort with some of the attractors. Like, part of the business model of Rebel Wisdom was obviously the courses that we were putting on.
Yep. They were not cheap. They were not cheap. I wrote an article about it on the Defamation Times.
Never happened. Like, there was never a point where I was like, oh, well, actually, I need to be critical of John Bavecchio. I need to be critical of one of the people who's doing a course with us. But we could easily have, could easily have had a course with Brett and Heather, for example. I did events with Brett and Heather, like, back in 2019. So
yeah, do you see the problem?
And I did feel like I was compelled to put.
They're like bad people. Do you see the problem?
Did, but there could have been other business relationships. So how do you balance purely truth-seeking with the incentive structures,
right,
and also the invisible incentive structures, particularly in the kind of heterodox space where people with big platforms don't get criticized by people within their own. Like, I think so many people are self-sacrificing and not saying things they know or they believe to be true because of the kind of social dynamics, because of the kind of feeling of, well, maybe if I criticize this person, I won't be able to get on their podcast again, or like all of these different things. Like, what are the failure conditions in these
Imagine thinking, what if I was trying to, what if I want to get on the David Fuller podcast? I guess can never talk about him.
I'd love to.
Come on.
Whatever comes next for me, I'd love to build in some of this kind of mimetic.
Yeah, Weinstein. When we said Brett and Heather,
from the beginning. And I don't quite know what that looks like. I think it has to be somehow probably user generated in terms of being funded by either bigger or smaller people who are able to kind of empower you to follow stuff. But you've got to be careful that you don't select for an audience that is pushing you in a particular direction. Right. Are there enough people who kind of value nuance, value kind of you following wherever the kind of uncomfortable exploration will lead? And I don't know. I'm really more and more aware of all of the different factors that handicap pure truth seeking.
Okay, well, it sounds like you're still favorable to crowdfunding. Like, you're not.
Yes, of course. Yes, the pensioners, they're going to still give them money. Absolutely.
Positive in terms of relative to traditional, the way that traditional media would be funded. Sounds like your impression is that crowdfunding is still better than the old world. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so.
But you think it sounds like you think the quality control or the problems, the mimetic protection, to use your excellent phrase, comes in more at the level almost of selecting who comes in or who
it depends,
it's for.
Yeah, crowdfunding is fine depending on who the crowd is.
Yeah.
Because crowdfunding can also, like, for example, I think Dave Rubin, the Dave Rubin trajectory is really fascinating. And if anyone hasn't watched the Timber on Toast series about Dave Rubin, Dave Rubin's Battle of Ideas, have you seen that?
No.
You have to watch it.
So give us the TLDR on Rubin's
It's 4 hours
trajectory.
of Rubin's trajectory from, hey, I think there's a problem with when he did this. I think his first interview was with Sam Harris, where he was just sort of leaving the Young Turks and being like, hey, I think there's a problem with intolerance on the left.
Yeah.
I'm a liberal. To then basically having Milo Yiannopoulos on, realizing that the anti-woke thing was getting all of the views and getting more and more extreme, up to in 2020 he was basically kind of QAnon light, saying Trump's got something. He basically full-on Trump apologist at the time of kind of January the 6th, pretty much.
This guy was like, not this. It took this. How long did it take him to figure this out about Dave Rubin? Like 2020. Come on, man.
Oh, kicking. But what? Yeah, I mean, what?
Dave Rubin was so obviously
I think he's
just dumb.
culturally irrelevant, but he was culturally
time.
relevant for a while because he was cohering a conversation in this very interesting space at the beginning of the whole IDW movement. But I think he was always pretending to be something that he wasn't.
Right.
In a way, now that he's a full-on Republican advocate, I think he's less. There's less of a problem now because I think he's identifying himself as what he is. But for a while, he was just like, oh, I'm just interested in ideas. I'm just following.
Yeah, he was just doing what you're doing right now.
It was always
Fuller. He was just doing what you're doing right now.
The reason I mention that is because I'm pretty sure that it's his audience, the Patreon audience, and the people who are basically funding him to make the program, who are the radicalizing factor, because they were attracted for that kind of strong anti-woke.
All right, but then again, the Dave Rubin just has shitty character. Like, what do you like?
When Rebel Wisdom,
he just keeps telling this like almost the same story over and over and over again about people that he couldn't figure out had shitty character already.
Dave Rubin, and they were the sort of like red meat, anti-woke stuff. And then over time, we attracted a different audience, many of whom have got a background in things like integral theory or developmental thinking, and they were much more comfortable with kind of nuance and more less strident. So I think it's possible to create an audience that is not pulling you too far in that direction, whereas if you start doing stuff about conspiracy or if you start doing stuff about kind of vaccines, you are going to attract a particular audience, and I've got a friend who friends of theirs, basically wellness influencers who did go down the conspirituality route, found their followings like 50x or 100x during the pandemic. But he was saying, like, on one side he's kind of jealous of them, but on another side he's like, that audience will eat them alive if they now kind of in any way backtrack from the positions that they've been.
Did you just use the word
posting.
conspirituality?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't heard that. Okay.
Well, that's because you're an idiot.
But it makes obvious sense to me when you say it.
Conspiracy and spirituality.
If he's not even going to say, like, drop our friend's podcast about it. He knows about, like, Julian and Derek, and I forget who else do the conspirituality podcast, but he's not going to suggest anybody listen to it.
Sure.
Which is a huge,
because a lot of the conspiracy theories are pseudo-religious in a way.
Yeah, there's that, but it's more that
they've criticized David Fuller like I have.
And wellness influencers became increasingly conspiratorial during the pandemic.
Oh, okay.
And there's an overlap.
No, it wasn't during the pandemic. It existed prior.
And a vulnerability in the spiritual community, because the spiritual community,
like before the pandemic, people were talking about the yoga studio to QAnon pipeline. Like, this guy, like, this is a person whose finger was not on the pulse.
Secret. The whole kind of like imagine magical thinking of just if you positive visualizations, creating your own reality.
Yep.
And so in a way it's like already a positive conspiracy thinking. Conspiracy theory. And it doesn't take much before it flips into the kind of opposite of that.
Boy, this is sure insightful. Thanks.
Version of everything's
Fuller, I can't believe
everything's arranged, everything is kind of organized, everything is, instead of it being a positive conspiracy, it's a negative one.
Right.
So yeah, there's a great podcast called Conspirituality.
Oh shit, he did mention Derek.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. It makes perfect sense, right? Because that's the that's basically the pros and cons of high openness, right? The disadvantage is apophania, and if you're open-minded, that's really great. You can be exposed to truths that other people aren't willing to see. You can also subscribe to just falsehoods that are actually just randomness. So interesting. So okay, let's talk about a little bit of some of the things that you are, more interested in, that you think might possibly be, topics that are
like topics, like what do you want to, like things that, topics, what are you interested in, things like, what is this guy doing?
Here to stay, or of increasing relevance rather than decreasing relevance. I think masculinity is something that you're
here we go. This will probably be the last segment we do before we go into red light on this, by the way. This is going to be the creepy men's rights activist stuff, or maybe it'll be like bro science ball tanning stuff, but this is going to be cringe. This is for sure not going to be great
as well. Tell us what is at a high level, what do you think's at stake for men and for masculinity? What's most important that you think over the next 5 to 10 years really still needs
keep asking the question, dude.
Worked out and will be of great interest to men.
Before diving into the masculinity piece, just generally, I'm always interested in what are the cultural pressure points on the conversation. And I think the gender one, or the masculinity conversation, is one. And I think things are already starting to shift. I'm interested in how the conversation is shifting between the toxic masculinity is the problem, masculinity itself is the problem, therefore we need less masculinity, versus my perspective, and which comes from lots of the personal growth stuff I've done, which is immature masculinity is a problem and mature masculinity is a solution. In the same way that immature femininity is a problem and mature kind of femininity is a solution.
Like, what did you not say?
And I think there is a
what the fuck is he talking
conversation moving. We're about 4 years on from Me Too, and in the aftermath of Me Too, there was a sense of women it's now your time to speak, and it's men, it's your time to listen, which makes sense at the time. There was I think it was a necessary move, but by definition,
I think people were saying that broadly across society. They were just on this issue, just shut up a little bit.
A relationship where one partner speaks and the other one shuts up is not a relationship. So it's what is a healthy relationship between men and women? I feel like so many of the cultural dynamics are downstream from a lot of these. So many of the political and societal questions are downstream from the kind of that fundamental kind of relating question. So that's something I'm really drawn to.
What?
I've always hosted men's retreats, and
that must suck.
I'm interested in that conversation.
The men's retreat with David Fuller and whoever else goes on the men's retreat with David Fuller's got to be just awful. Probably $800 to go to.
There's a more healthy conversation,
and you pay for your own stuff.
And also this catch-22 that so many of the guys who come to our men's retreats talk about, which is I'm being encouraged by the culture to be more vulnerable, more open, shed these kind of unhealthy patterns, and also told shut the fuck up, stop mansplaining, and stop taking up so much space.
But no, you're being told the same thing, right? In those two things, you're actually being told the same thing. That's just different versions of the same thing that the awful men that go to this guy's men's retreat. Oh no.
The guys
now I feel sorry for David Fuller, because these retreats for him and people who are more obnoxious than he is, I think.
The younger generation feel really torn, they're being given contradictory messages by the culture.
Right.
And so there's something about that. Is there a more healthy conversation around masculinity? And I think a lot of women like Nina Power are kind of talking about this now. I think there is a new openness, and so that's something that feels quite alive. So it's something that I do want to kind of continue exploring.
I think I buy that. I mean, I don't really make too much content in that's branded as masculinity stuff, but I am a man, obviously, and I guess some people follow me for some things kind of related to that in some way. But because what I see is that the internet content that caters to the kind of trad, manly types of guys who feel that kind of all the trad, instinctual, masculine drives, and don't.
Oh no. This guy's the problem being described too. He's equating traditional and with like being a man and being masculine. He's like already like equating those things, and that's the actual problem. That's the whole problem. Y'all are saying just a lot of words and talking around the actual problem.
Know how to, manifest that happily and successfully in this increasingly kind of feminized society, frankly, that we live in, are turning to these like supplies of internet content that are incredibly just crappy, frankly. I mean, like the bar is very low for being like a masculinity influencer of some.
You were talking about Jordan Peterson a little while ago.
These guys, I really think they're quite terrible. And this is not even from a moral, I'm not like moral grandstanding, like they should be more feminist or something like that. But just, it's like, especially when it comes to things like marriage and dating, I find that some of the trad manliness advice people, especially on Twitter, like the right-wing bodybuilder types who are like, building these huge accounts, giving this like really, really cheap, ridiculous advice on how to think about women and how to talk to women. I find this stuff to be incredibly deleterious for men and for the culture.
You figured out that the pickup artists are bad. Good job, everybody. Round of applause for our interview host here. Figured out the pickup artist guys are shitty. Good job.
A lot of it, and it seems to grow and people seem to love it. So it seems like there's a massive gap there, and what's currently on offer is I find really horrible, especially when it comes to dating and marriage, specifically around like young men. I feel like it's easy to critique the kind of the excessive feminism and the stuff that tells men they're evil, and we're past that. That's an example of like we're past the peak of that. I think most smart people and men included have a sense that that's all crap and unfair, and they're not gonna follow that stuff much longer if at all. But there's this new breed of like pro man, almost like pro toxic masculinity, where it's like, let's embrace it. Let's, you actually have to be somewhat toxic masculinity to get chicks and to, succeed and make money in life. And I find one of the specific things that people like, I feel like young men specifically they're being
dude,
taught.
It's fucking, what is it? 2016, 2014 on YouTube. What is this guy? This is just like the pickup artist shit. This is a very long time ago.
To kind of overestimate their mating prospects.
Reared its ugly head on the internet as we know it today.
Are really smart dudes who are not married yet, but they're hoping to get married. They want to build a family, and they like actually genuinely take real advice from like random anon Twitter like male masculinity people. And it's like I've known friends who like they'll meet a girl and they won't, and she's like I meet her, she seems pretty, she seems pretty smart, she seems nice, and the guy will later next week I'm like, oh yeah, so how's that going? Are you still seeing that girl? And he'll be like, no, she has some problem X, and it's like some problem that he just got from the internet. And it's like, do you even really care about that? Is that really a real problem for you? Or is it because you're reading these
I don't believe this story because I don't believe
Twitter
this guy has any friends.
Who just have psyoped you into thinking that.
But that's the only reason I don't believe
have
this
X, Y, and
story.
Z,
They've psyoped you. Okay, we're gonna. You know what? We have to stop the podcast portion of this at some point.
It seems like a massive.
But
problem.
make no mistake, we're watching the rest of this during the post game. I'll probably put the post game out on Saturday, like I do sometimes now, or a part of the post game out on Saturday. I'm sorry that we've subjected everyone to this for the intellectual Dollar Tree, but usually when I feel like this at the end of the show, it's one of our better shows. So we're here every Thursday, and we're masculine. We're not your internet dad, though. We're not going to teach you to get chicks. Join us, twitch.tv/Echoplex Media. And if you're not a Twitch person or whatever, you can find all of our podcasts on your favorite podcast app just by searching for Echoplex Media. I believe HK will be joining me in the post game this evening. This is Boomers by Periscope. I'm going to change the color of the lights in this place, change the content of my beverage, and I don't know, we'll be back for more of this horrible piece of content.
You recall
can't get enough Echoplex and want to keep the conversation going with the hosts and community when we're not live? Then join our Discord server at discord.me/Echoplex. We have text channels, voice channels, meme repositories, and a whole section of screenshots that we don't even remember where they came from. Come join the Now Space on Discord at discord.me/Echoplex.